Welcome to the Decentralized News Podcast, where we report on the major events affecting the crypto economy. I'm your host, Piter, joined as always by Aussie. What's up, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing great. Happy Monday.
Yeah, we've got a huge week. We'll jump right into our educational and entertaining content. That is, of course, not financial advice. But we had the Bitcoin conference, and we saw game theory playing out in real time. So we got headlines from Trump, RFK Jr., Cynthia Lummis. There was also, Van Eck, you want to bring up? There's some talk out of Asia right after the conference, maybe inspired by the conference, and some stories suggesting a softening from the Democratic Party on crypto. So let's jump right into it. Breaking news this morning, and maybe why the market was pumping overnight and seemed to stall out recently. There is a report from Arkham that the U.S. government just moved $2 billion worth of Bitcoin. And at first they reported they moved it, and they reported they split it into two addresses. They also reported it's going to be 10,000 BTC in the one and 19,000 or about 20,000 in the other. And as part of this tweet, they also said they believe the 10,000 represents a deposit into an institutional custody account. So maybe some threats that there's going to be some selling.
It'll be interesting. That's what the market took it as. The U.S. government holds quite a bit of Bitcoin, about $14.5 billion worth. And so
it's like a little over 200,000. They're the number one. To put it in context, El Salvador has like between 5,000 and 6,000, and they are aggressively buying. So this is just from seized Bitcoin.
Yeah, this is all seized from Silk Road. Just like what was seized in the German government had seized and sold recently. This is a similar thing, but at 4 or 5 times the scale. So
but we'll see if it means selling. We don't know 100% yet. But
yeah, there's actually not been any seen sell pressure. Everything that's kind of movement, why it's just been movement, and then the market reacting to the movement. There hasn't actually been any word from the U.S. government that they're actually selling the Bitcoin or anything of the sort. It's just,
but worth watching and worth mentioning before we get into the main part of our show, and that was the Bitcoin conference. So Trump spoke. I don't know if you watched it. I did. He said a lot of cool things. He sounded really goofy. It's not like his topic. To me, it didn't sound like it. But anyway, he said a lot of really headline things, and we'll go into that. One was that got the biggest roar from the crowd. And he plays it up. He said it twice. He's, oh, wow, I didn't expect that. Let's do that again. I'm going to fire SEC chair Gary Gensler if elected. Wow, big roar.
Yeah, that got a lot of people excited. I've watched clips of it, and I got a really good recap from my buddy who was at Bitcoin Nashville in person. So I've been chatting with him throughout the time that he's been at the conference, getting awesome kind of insights into all the different conversations and the chatter that's going on at the conference. And yeah, that one got quite a response over the weekend. Firing SEC Gary Gensler is very popular across all demographics of crypto. That's so.
Even Democrats, a lot of Democrats want to get rid of him just because he's such a black eye on him. But the other big thing he said is that he will stop the U.S. from selling any of the 213,000 Bitcoin that they currently have seized. They haven't bought any, so that's like a big difference. But it's all been seized. But we're not going to sell it, and we're going to create. Everyone's so excited. We're going to create a Bitcoin reserve. He said we're going to create a Bitcoin stockpile. Is actually what he said. So he used different terms. A little bit of a backstep, I thought. And I think the difference is he didn't talk about any purchase program, which we'll see from Cynthia Lummis and from RFK Jr. But he did say we're going to hold. We're never going to sell it. Very nice to hear him say that and talk about a national strategic. He did use the word strategic Bitcoin stockpile, a major advance, really, in the grand scheme of things. But what did you think of that?
Yeah, I don't take it as strong as a step back. He said a strategic reserve, and he never really said that they would be buying Bitcoin. Like that was it was what some people assumed, but he never really did say that he was buying Bitcoin. But I guess
that is how he could have taken the statement a little further.
Yeah, it's how he could have doubled down and made the statement really bullish. This is still.
If you're creating a reserve, you're consistently buying, right?
Yeah. Ideally, you'd be consistently buying. Right. If you
so he can come further. We're going to push him further here on the Decentralized News Podcast.
Yeah,
this is what we want, President Trump.
Yeah, and given what RFK Jr. announced, that's like RFK Jr. and Cynthia Lummis both announced buying programs that they would
Right.
put in.
Huge buying programs.
Yeah,
Like
ridiculous. It would dwarf what the U.S. currently
20,
holds.
25% of the Bitcoins, huge percentage of the supply of Bitcoin. And what it would cause if they did do that. My
Yeah,
goodness.
RFK Jr. was talking about transferring all the Bitcoin that's held to be held by the Department of Treasury as a strategic asset, which is essentially what Trump is saying he would do. And that's Trump's plan, but he wouldn't go any further other than stopping the US government from developing a CBDC. Pretty favorable on stablecoins, but basically was like, no CBDC, we'll transfer what we hold as a strategic national stockpile and will allow the development of stable coins in the US. And
he also talked about, like Bitcoin mining. He also talked about an advisory council, which is all nice stuff. And then just to round it up, the other major thing he said was commute Silk Road founder Ross Ulbricht's sentence, which is a popular thing in the Bitcoin community. But yeah, and then you mentioned RFK, but he mentioned 3 executive orders he would do. One, keep the 200,000 Bitcoin, which we talked about. Establish buying Bitcoin, 550 Bitcoin daily until we reserve 4 million of the 21 million Bitcoin. But the other interesting one was he would make an executive order towards the IRS, which does the taxes here, to publish guidance saying all transaction between Bitcoin and US dollar are unreportable transactions and by extension non-taxable. I thought that is never going to happen, but interesting to hear him say that. And that he's a huge supporter and that he now has most of his wealth in Bitcoin. He's never said it quite like that. He's obviously been a huge supporter and he's fully committed to Bitcoin, which really got me excited because he is going to be a voice after the election, like an important voice after the election. I think will still have influence in this country. He's popular. He really has no chance of winning, but it doesn't mean he just disappears and that his views disappears. I think he'll be an important advocate for Bitcoin and crypto even after the election.
Yeah, now that he's really emerged, he's a Kennedy, so he's got a lot of influence as it is. He's got a lot of friends, but now that he's really come out in the public eye the way he has, I think he'll become like a Michael Saylor for Bitcoin and a better connected Michael Saylor in some ways.
With like a political edge to him, politics and the regulation side, as opposed to Saylor's more adoption, game theory, reserve asset type of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all connected, but
yeah, it adds a new aspect to the Bitcoin. If you could have like a Bitcoin triad of Cynthia Lummis, who's all about getting, like, she's in the House trying to get, or in the Senate trying to get legislation approved. RFK Jr.'s out there lobbying, and then you got Michael Saylor that's trying to do the adoption. Yeah.
And he's doing it, and it's successful, and he's getting more companies to do it. Like, he'll be a big advocate in the business community and helping onboard businesses who want Bitcoin as a treasury reserve.
Exactly. And let's talk on, I guess, the third person in that triad, Cynthia Lummis, because she did also introduce a bill into the Senate over the week, like with this whole Bitcoin conference. We'll be honest, there's not a high likelihood that this gets approved, but it's worth talking about. She announced a plan to buy 1 million Bitcoin, so about a quarter of what RFK Jr. was talking about. Her plan was I'd say a bit less bullish, because it is talking about holding it for a minimum of 5 years and using it to basically hold for at least 20 years, or unless tokens are sold, to reduce the debt, so to pay down the debt.
Which is today it was announced we hit 35 trillion, or over $100,000 per person in debt in the U.S. So this is a real issue.
Yeah, it's a big issue in the U.S. And it's bullish, but it's not nearly as bullish a plan as RFK Jr. But it's a bit more bullish than Trump.
Yeah, maxis want to see the dollar replaced, and we don't want to fix the dollar with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's just better. You know what I mean? That's more like the true hardcore maxi attitude. But still exciting to see this, that it's strong enough it could save the dollar.
Yeah. And
rescue the U.S. out of national debt.
Yeah, and so there's some bullishness, and like they're holding at least 20 years, but the whole caveat, unless to reduce the debt, does that essentially negate that whole idea? Because in the end, you could say you're paying down the debt and sell that Bitcoin. Any government following the current Senate could technically do that if this bill was passed. It doesn't look, at least from any reading, that this has a lot of enough support in the House or in the Senate to go anywhere, but it's a symbolic bill at the very least.
This kind of, I want to add on this. So like a bill like this is coming from the Republican side, and now
No, it's a Democrat. Isn't she a Democrat?
Cynthia Lummis?
Yeah, I thought Loomis was a Democrat, but she's from Wyoming.
No way.
So
there is no way. There is no way. I would be absolutely shocked.
I always thought she was a
she's
Democrat.
Republican, dude. Okay,
yeah,
I would
totally right.
I would have been like on the floor. Okay, but I had to check because it goes into the point. So there's been a call. Now we have Harris, and there's a chance to reset a little bit with the crypto community, and there are people encouraging it. We'll talk about that. But if there are bills like this being put forward on the Republican side and they're fighting against them, there's a reason for people to be a little sus on the Democratic Party. They've put out people like Gary Gensler and Elizabeth Warren and Biden vetoing bills. You know what I mean? Like their track record hasn't been good. So they may try to say all the things right now, but we'll see. Like these bills put the rubber on the road. Like if they're going to fight against it, it's okay. How are you one hand saying, oh, we're getting softer on it, and on the other hand, not?
Yeah. Oh, I think I think just the flaw that I pointed out of you could technically sell that Bitcoin to reduce the debt at any time.
Yeah.
It just shows a massive flaw in the bill. Like, to me, is a massive flaw in the bill from the get-go. It could be like, you can't sell the Bitcoin for, if it was in the bill, like, you can't sell the Bitcoin for at least 5 years, and you can only sell a portion of it to reduce the debt. Like, you can only sell X amount to
I don't know, 20 years, yeah, you can sell something to reduce the debt, but in 20 years, look how far Bitcoin has gotten in 15 years. There may be less incentive to sell it, but we'll see.
Anytime before the 20 years is up.
For the debt, yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying is maybe you can put a stopgap on the debt measure of you can't sell it for at least 5 years, or you can't sell it for.
It actually does make sense because let's get some gains out of it, you know what I mean, or something before
let's make this investment worth holding, and then we can take profits. Let's go through an entire second Bitcoin cycle with it before we take profits to pay down some of the debt at the very least. So to me, there's some issues.
Speaking of government involvement, right after all this talk of Bitcoin strategic reserve, that was the big hype going into the conference. Is Trump going to say it? Whether they do or not, and Trump is no guarantee to get elected anyway. We could get status quo attitude from the U.S. government. It's very possible. But even if he doesn't get elected, he's putting pressure on other countries to do it, right? If the U.S. starts buying that much Bitcoin or whatever,
it's getting more and more expensive for anybody else.
Yeah, so maybe we need to get ahead of them. At least they're chaotic and they don't know what the hell they're doing. But a Hong Kong lawmaker came out advocating, looking into this idea, right? So Johnny Ng, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but he's a member of the Hong Kong Legislative Council, wrote in a post on X that is worth considering to assign Bitcoin as part of the region's official financial reserves. You could see this around the globe before the U.S. even gets involved. We may be playing catch up.
So that's pretty massive, especially considering some of the news that we have out of China. Yes, Hong Kong is at least partially independent from China, but geopolitically, it's still important. There's some pretty significant issues in China right now, and to make this statement is pretty bullish coming from that market, which has more or less, like China, mainland China in particular, has been more or less closed to Bitcoin up until recently. So this would be pretty large news if Hong Kong, which also has their own Bitcoin ETFs, were to hop on board. And this is as we are starting to see a bit kind of a flip from the Democrats. It's not really a flip because we have had some Democrats that have been pro-Bitcoin and pro-crypto prior to this, but we've had 14 Democratic House members and numerous candidates send letters to the DNC Democratic National Committee and the current VP, Kamala Harris, urging the party to take a more forward-looking approach to digital assets and blockchain. At least part of the party calling for a more crypto-friendly view and calling for a crypto-friendly vice president nominee, with Kamala Harris taking on the Democratic nomination for president. There's now calls for a crypto-friendly vice president candidate, considering the fact that Trump did name a pro-crypto candidate as his VP. So they're all arguing for kind of a change in perspective and help the public's perception around crypto, around the Democrats' view on crypto. So this is interesting. And they even called for the replacement of Gary Gensler for someone that is more pro-innovation. So this is interesting.
The shifts, it's polling, it's working. So they're only talking about this probably because it's working. And this article does note 52 million Americans have embraced digital assets, and 20% of voters in battleground states have identified crypto as a major election issue. So this is something that could potentially decide the election, basically. That's how big of an issue this is becoming. So they're like, these Democrats are saying, ignore this at your peril.
Yeah. And this is like pretty huge just for crypto as a whole, because last election cycle, we were a nothing burger. We weren't talked about, or very little talked about. And now it seems to be one of the hottest issues on the election table right now, what to do with Bitcoin and digital assets.
We were criminals and hackers and anti-environmentalists in the last cycle. That is not really, you're not hearing all those things quite as much this time around. But yeah, the Harris campaign, there was a Financial Times article that came out that said that members of the Harris team have recently contacted individuals connected to major crypto companies, including Coinbase, Circle, Ripple Labs. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes. I'm a little sus, but like I said, I'm glad there are bills that they have to react to, and you can see a little bit better. But if they see the other side winning, like their position is beating them on this, there's an expression in politics. If you're going to get beat on an issue, you just try to hug your opponent and stay within your platform, but just stay as close to them as you can. Just as close as you can get to them. Yeah, just grade the line and just soften your approach. And while you can't necessarily beat them on the issue, you just try not to sound completely different. But I feel a lot of it's going to be just on the surface, what they say, not necessarily what they do. But we'll see. They do have an opportunity to redefine themselves a little bit. I would be shocked to see any major changes. Kamala Harris comes off to me as the type of person that is not particularly independent and forward-thinking and a lot of her own ideas. She's going to change the party. You know what I mean? I just don't see that. It's more of kind of status quo, established kind of norms within the party. I more expect from her. So I would just be shocked.
Yeah, I'd be a bit shocked to see massive change from the DNC, especially because VP for Biden didn't do anything out of the box as the VP, wasn't particularly outspoken, and was just the automatic nominee the minute that Biden stepped down. There wasn't really...
It feels like a very much steady as we go kind of selection, and major policy changes. It could happen with crypto. It's such a dynamic space. They may see polling numbers and realize they have got to change. But there's a lot of entrenched interests that I don't think they go so easily.
Yeah, and like the DNC has told Elizabeth Warren to calm down on her crypto stance and her crypto rhetoric. She's been warned, apparently. But
your CEO quote fits in nicely here, because there are traditional elites, traditional money, even boomer money, so to speak, that is getting excited about this space.
Yeah. So one thing that I mentioned a bit at the top of the show was Van Eck. Their CEO was also at the conference. There were many CEOs from many major companies there, several of the big spot ETF hold companies. But Van Eck, their CEO, spoke, and he said that more than 30% of all of his holdings are in Bitcoin. So
big number for that guy.
That's a huge percentage holdings. This man
runs... The fact that he's comfortable with that, that's a pretty nice signal to
to the rest of the market, to regular investors, to other big institutional players. Like, that's a
I'm
pretty
comfortable
huge
with
sum.
30% sitting there. I'm good. I'm not worried. And it's not that he's not worried, but it's still a risky investment. But it's like he wouldn't put that kind of money in without some real due diligence that is at least he has control over it. You know what I mean? I think there's such a misconception with it. Oh, it's just going to get stolen from me, hacked. Like there's no way to. There's just not this barrier about how to secure it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we don't really know. He wasn't clear whether it was in Bitcoin spot ETFs or if it was in Bitcoin.
Right.
So we don't know whether he's gone decentralized or centralized.
But there are these new products now, these new ETF products for the rest of the market to simplify entering the market.
Yeah, so at the very least, he made that's a very bullish statement, and just it is a signal to the rest of kind of the wealthy individuals of the U.S. and throughout the world that it is a worthwhile investment at the very least, if not an asset.
It's getting to the point where it's probably a point past a long time ago, but it's still hasn't crystallized in a lot of people's mind. It's riskier not to hold it at a certain point. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think not to have any allocation into it. It's okay. You're just going to be like, F my family's future or whatever. You know what I mean? I'm just going to live for the now. I'm living in fiat, baby.
Absolutely. And so that's pretty interesting, especially now that we also have the Ethereum ETFs that have just finished their first week. If we look at the Ethereum ETFs, they had about $1 billion worth of net inflows into the 8 funds. However, they were overwhelmed by about $1.5 billion in net outflows from Grayscale. That being said, like
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's the same tune that we got when the Bitcoin ETFs launched in January. And I would say that this had a little bit less fanfare because the Bitcoin spot ETFs essentially got approved and launched within 2 days. These basically we got the approval, even though it wasn't like a final approval, 2 months before they launched.
So
yeah,
it's like the same story, so it's not as big of a story. It's like, we've been through this before.
It didn't launch. It wasn't as big of news and didn't hit the headlines nearly as hard. They generated about 40% of the net inflows that were witnessed by the Bitcoin ETFs. And so
I was surprised with that number, actually. I thought it would have been a lot more muted than that.
So the inflows were still pretty strong. Were they perfect? No. But the net inflows were still strong enough. And
I also read that the inflows in the BTC dropped the week this came out. So it might be a little bit of diversification.
Yeah. So we'll see. It took a few weeks for kind of the Grayscale ETH or the Grayscale Bitcoin to really stop dumping. So we can assume the same for ETH, especially because apparently the discount on ETH was even sharper at times than Bitcoin, whereas like Bitcoin still hadn't fully made up the gap yet, and ETH definitely hadn't either. And so that the expectations is that there's still some selling. They only have about $7.25 billion worth of Ethereum left in the Grayscale ETF, so you're looking at a few weeks of selling, and they would basically be out of ETH, and at least a portion of the ETH that was sold actually went into other ETFs, and so it's not fully being just liquidated from the market.
Yeah, this story did take a backseat to the Bitcoin conference and Big Daddy King Bitcoin. No one was talking about an Ethereum reserve currency. I think the game theory side of Bitcoin kind of showed its head this week a little bit, taking the spotlight away from Ethereum.
Yeah. Looking at that, we've got Bitcoin stocks bleeding because China had a surprise interest rate cut, which is signaling a bit of a panic. Their treasury yield curve steepened. This was a off-schedule surprise cut and was a cut by about 0.2% and injected about 200 billion yen, so about $27.5 billion of liquidity into the market. It's the biggest reduction that they've done since 2020. And so the expansion their GDP expansion was weaker at 4.7 than expectations of 5.1, and even slower than the first quarters at 5.3. So that kind of China is showing market weakness, and there's there's something to be potentially worried about there, but might be why they're opening up to Bitcoin a bit. This follows the fact that Canada's cut rates for the second time. This was to be expected. This wasn't a surprise. The Canada's market always front runs the US in terms of cuts or raises, and because the US raises rates, things get more expensive in the US, but they get even more expensive in Canada, and we've seen our second rate cut another quarter basis point.
Yeah, I was curious if this surprise from China would affect the numbers for the expectations for the Fed meeting that's going to happen this week. We're on the 31st. We're a couple days out. Not really. I didn't look at it right before, but it's 95% chance no change. So a 5% chance of ease, but 0, it's going to be raised. But by September, there's right now 100% chance of a cut, or maybe even like 2 cuts. So not much change there, but not really. It's not going to be a surprise cut this week. I was hoping maybe.
Yeah, at least economists are not predicting that, especially with GDP coming in strong at 2.8, right, which was a 0.7 above forecast, and PCE numbers coming in flat. They came in at expectations, which was up 0.1%, so not massively game-changing. So expectations haven't really changed much. We are seeing a bit more expectations for a potential third cut this year. So a cut September, November, December, but it's still not firm. It's right now 35-40% expecting only 2 cuts and about 55 expecting a third. We'll see how that changes in the next little while. I will see what the talk is like at the Fed meeting on Wednesday. We'll update everybody next week.
Well, should we get into the speed run? Before we do, please do consider liking and subscribing if you enjoy the content. Polygon is upgrading to Pol, and they made an announcement that's going to happen September 4th. So exciting news for the entire Polygon system, updating to the ag layer, they call it.
Yeah, so it's their migration towards the ag layer. The ag layer will come sometimes before the end of the year, and they're moving from Matic to Pol as part of that on September 4th. Looking at Solend has rebranded to Save and has launched Dump.Fund, which is basically a meme on Pump.Fund, and Dump.Fund is a protocol to short memes, whereas Pump.Fund is a protocol to launch memes. That's pretty cool, embracing that meme coin culture on Solana.
If you've lost money in meme coins, now you can bet on yourself.
Yeah, you can bet on meme coins going to 0. That being said, Bitcoin miner Mara has bought $100 million worth of Bitcoin and aims to develop a full HODL policy.
A miner buying Bitcoin.
Yeah,
wild.
That's wild. They now hold over 20,000 Bitcoin, and they essentially want to build a Bitcoin treasury and retain all Bitcoin mined in its operations and make strategic open market purchases. So mining it, but also buying it like MicroStrategy. So that's pretty interesting as we continue to see Bitcoin look to be kind of a strategic reserve asset for more and more companies and governments throughout the world.
How do you buy Bitcoin if your revenue comes from selling Bitcoin? It's interesting. I'm glad they're hardcore holders, but is it like everything left over after paying expenses? They don't really say it clearly.
Well, they don't particularly say it, but often mining facilities are also linked to either they'll have built energy fields that overproduce the energy that they need, or in some really innovative cases, they're actually linked to like greenhouse. They've got a green energy field, and then the miners and the heat ducts on the miners are linked to greenhouses that grow vegetables. And
I didn't think that was enough to produce revenue over the cost of mining for the Bitcoin, though. But yeah,
if you've got a big enough energy field, then yeah, you can. It's interesting, but it's maybe.
God bless them. I couldn't help but think, like, how are they doing this?
Yeah.
But that's not the only Bitcoin news. Lightning Labs released Taproot assets on Bitcoin Lightning Network, calling it the first multi-asset Lightning protocol on mainnet. So Lightning's still developing. The users can send assets just as stablecoin on Lightning. Now, Lightning has been a little controversial. Should we be pushing it? Should we just try to think of something new? Is it really useful? But it continues to develop.
And then finally, Solana is trying to compete with Polygon for mind share in the prediction markets. Drift is planning to launch a prediction marketplace. This is essentially the Poly markets, which is referenced on Fox and basically all major television channels as the prediction markets of Polygon, end of the world right now. So Solana trying to make a grab at that market. You put a cool comment of when Ton prediction market could be interesting. Lots of users on Ton, especially playing in the meme coin space, would make sense. But
It's also exciting. They have the Messenger app, right? So it's an interesting onboarding case to get people into crypto. And then if you have something that's proven to be a really cool idea, this is the whole poly market idea and betting. You're seeing it on Solana. They like to gamble over there. It certainly seems like it may work. And then Ton, just with all the messengers, and then you have this real world use case for the blockchain. Maybe it can grow there.
maybe. That being said, please consider liking and subscribing to the video. We really appreciate everybody tuning in for our not financial advice and our content that we make just for educational and entertainment purposes. Please do your own research on everything that we put out and just make sure that you research anything in crypto before you invest.
Yeah, because I tried to become a financial advisor. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
I failed, dude. I couldn't pass any of the tests. Don't listen to me.
Stay tuned for our next video, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.